Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session today. We are super excited to have Cassandra Melendez with us. She has presented for us many times before, and they are always fantastic. So we are super excited. Cassandra holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Exceptional Education, Early Childhood, and a Master of Arts in Early Childhood Special Education, Neurology of Autism from Prescott College, and has been teaching early childhood education courses for UAGC since August 2010. During this time, she has been recognized and featured as a distinguished instructor, which is completely amazing. Her primary workload includes early childhood education and early childhood development and differentiated instruction. In addition to teaching at UAGC, Cassandra is a full-time preschool and special education teacher in an inclusive setting in Tucson, Arizona. And Cassandra, again, you are always an amazing presenter, so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Next slide, please. So this disclaimer just says that an online degree from the University of Arizona Global Campus does not lead to immediate teacher licensure. And that means that if you do get a degree here at UAGC, you will need to go back to your individual state and make sure that you are certified and licensed to become a teacher in that state. Next slide, please. This disclaimer just says that UAGC does provide links to other websites and institutions, but is not responsible for anything in the presentation that you are getting ready to listen to. So Cassandra, the floor is yours, and thank you so much again.
Well, thank you so much for introducing me. I'm excited to be presenting again this year. And so this session is aimed to provide professionals with some strategies for supporting parents and families and for managing conversations that might be challenging to approach in general. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go over some background information, then I'm going to give some general tips for how to manage some of these conversations, and then we'll go into the planning process for meetings, and I'm going to give a phrasing model that you can use that I found is really effective. And we'll just go from there. So just to provide some background information and why this topic is important to me, as a special education preschool teacher, I'm meeting with families a lot, and we're discussing their child's development. And this is often the first time that families are hearing about their child's development from a professional. Because I also teach special ed, this is the first time parents are learning about their child's special needs and what that means in terms of their development. I also teach in an inclusive setting, so even though I have children who are enrolled as typically developing peers, all children have different behaviors and different challenges, and it's important for educators and professionals in the field to feel confident and comfortable speaking with parents about those challenges. And occasionally, sometimes those challenges are more pronounced than they might initially appear, and then we are presenting families with information and referrals for being screened for special education or other services that they might qualify for. So when I first started off teaching, I was really sensitive to that topic, and I didn't want families to become upset. I was always worried about families becoming emotional. And so I made the situation much harder than it really needed to be. So I worked on just changing some of my phrasing and my approach to conferences, and I found that it made a really big difference in how parents received the information and how I felt about the conference going in. So we're just going to go over some of these strategies that I've just developed over the years, and I'm hoping that you'll find them helpful too. So something to remember before you meet with families is that your relationship with the parents is essential to the success of the meeting. If you don't know a family well, you're not going to be in the best position to really work with them collaboratively to support the development of their child. The best thing you can do is really work on forming that relationship early with all of your families. So when a situation arises and you need to have this type of conversation, it goes smoother. You have a foundation of trust, and parents are going to be more willing to accept what you have to say if that foundation of trust is there. Now, if you find that there's a child in the program and you have some serious concerns and you don't know the family very well, consider scheduling a meeting to get to know that family first. Sometimes a little bit of insight can make a world of difference in how you're viewing a certain behavior or skill. And then that in turn makes a difference in how you're able to support the child and the family. Something that may have seemed like a big challenge or a big concern initially may not seem like such a big deal after you're working with the child and the family for a little while. So just some general guidelines, and this is just how you're going to picture going into the meetings. The most important thing is no news is good news and no news is bad news. We're not giving parents good news. We're not giving them bad news. We're giving them information. And the information that we're giving them is important. It's important information. There are things they need to know. You're presenting factual information to families that's going to be essential in allowing them to learn more about their child and allowing the team to collaborate and support the child. So if you're going into a meeting feeling like, oh man, I don't want to give the parent this information, that parent's going to feel that. They're going to feel bad about the information that's being presented. It's really important to reframe how you feel about the information and how you feel about the situation in general in order to be able to effectively explain the situation, your concerns, and go from there to develop a solution to the issue. It's also really important to maintain a positive tone. Using a positive tone conveys positive intent. So no matter how serious the issue is, if you feel like you can't smile, you can't have a positive demeanor going into the meeting, that's probably more reflective of how you feel about the situation than the situation itself. If there's a situation where there's a serious behavior and it's going to result in a serious consequence, that consequence is going to be the same, whether you say it in a friendly manner or if you say it really sternly. So keep that in mind. However you're presenting the information, that's going to be reflected. When we speak to people, it's sort of like looking into a mirror. So if you notice families starting to get tense, check your body language and assess your tone and your approach, because that might be feeding that reaction. And we're going to talk a little bit about other ways to avoid having those types of reactions in a little bit. So the next thing to keep in mind is that the information needs to be factual and specific. We don't want to be emotional or speculative as we're presenting families with this type of information. We're talking about their young child's development. This is the first time they're hearing about it from a professional, possibly from you, and it's really important that we're not speculating or being emotional during that time. We want to be really specific. We want to provide them concrete examples that illustrate what we're observing and what that means. We want to let them know what the exact skill is, when it's happening, how often it's happening, and if we think we know why it's happening, we need to share that too. So we're really focusing on being specific and exact. It's not how you feel about the behavior, it is the behavior or the skill itself. So just by focusing on that, your approach is going to be more objective, and it's going to remove a lot of that emotion that parents might feed into or feed off of you as you're presenting it. We're also going to focus on presenting information in terms of expected versus unexpected behaviors. Behaviors are not good or bad. They're either expected or they're unexpected. A child sitting and looking at a book, playing with friends, that's expected. So we view that in a positive manner. When a child is biting or throwing things, that's unexpected. And so it's not a bad behavior, it's an unexpected behavior. We want to make sure that we are outlining this and clarifying that for parents, because that in itself is going to impact how they feel about what you're talking about. If you're talking about expected behaviors versus unexpected behaviors, that feels different than talking about behaviors as good and bad. It's also going to allow you to compare it with the developmental expectation for the child that age. So instead of saying, oh, Jill doesn't know how to do this yet, she's not doing this yet, we're going to be really, really specific, provide them the exact skill, when it's happening, and we're going to compare that to what's expected for a child that age, and then you work towards a solution. When speaking to parents, it's really important to keep in mind that they are easily overwhelmed with information. So when you're meeting with the family, even if you have a lot of concerns regarding the child's development, it's really important that you review your observations. All of this information that you're going to be presenting to families is going to be based off your data analysis, going to be your observations. You're going to document those observations, look into them, and then see what the main area of need is. Even if you think, wow, this child has like 10 things that we really need to focus on, look at that carefully, see what that foundational skill is that they do have, and then you're building from there. You're going to scale that back. Most of the time, there's really only one or two areas of need that strongly impact a lot of other areas of need. So by analyzing your observational data, you're going to be able to identify the prerequisite skill that's needed for all of those other skills. And once you do that, you're going to be able to really narrow it down. And that's important because we don't want to meet with parents and have them feel like we're just ranting and raving about how much difficulty their child is having. We want to be really specific, and we can't work on all of these things at the same time anyways. So bringing in a parent and overwhelming them with all of the needs that their child has isn't helpful for them. And it's really not helpful for you as the professional, because you're not going to be able to impact all of those things simultaneously by having a bunch of different goals and things like that for the family to work on and for you to work on in your setting. So it's really important to narrow that down, target the most critical skill that's going to have the most impact, and focus only on that. Once that is met, you'll be able to see the change and then go from there. You might need to have another meeting to address some of those other concerns that weren't initially, that weren't impacted by the initial intervention, but that's okay. The most important thing is to not overwhelm families. So along those lines, when we're going into the meeting, some tips for just like preparing yourself is to be mindful about your feelings. When you are discussing a behavior or a situation with a family, you as a professional have your own feelings, your impression of the situation. You want to be mindful about how you feel about having the meeting in general and how you feel about the situation. If a child is hurting another child, or a child is hurting him or herself in your setting, and you're concerned for the child and the other children in the program, you don't want that concern to spill out into the meeting, because the meeting is for the benefit of the child and the family. So how you feel about the situation is going to impact your tone. It's going to impact what you say and how you say it. And it's really going to impact how the parents respond to what you say. So it's really important that if you are really frustrated with a situation, understandable, it's totally okay, it's expected. But during that meeting, that frustration needs to be put aside. So find a way to help yourself, take a few deep breaths, let go of those stressful feelings, and then visualize your positive outcome. What is it that you want to happen? Clarify that in your mind, know how you're going to get there. And throughout the meeting, no matter what happens, keep working towards realizing that goal. That goal is for the benefit of the child and the family. It should be well thought out. And so that's something that collaboratively during the meeting, all participants should be working towards. And I have a few do's and don'ts. So these are a few ways, we're going to have a positive tone. We're going to be friendly with families. We have specific information for them, but there are things that can trigger families into having they can trigger families into reacting defensively. It's not necessarily on purpose, but sometimes that happens. This is a hard topic to talk about with families, because we know that parents want to defend their child. They want to advocate for their child. That's their job. Their job is to be their child's advocate. Our job is to help them be their child's advocate. So we don't want to say things that are going to make them feel defensive or feel like their child is being attacked or that they're being attacked. So with that, my first do is use the child's name. Do use the child's name. Avoid saying your child. When you say your child, this can trigger a defensive response. When we say the child's name, we're assigning responsibility of the behavior to the child. When we say your child, parents can interpret that as us assigning responsibility to them for their child's behavior. And We want to avoid that for two reasons. One, because it's not their fault their child is biting, or not developing at the same rate as their peers. One thing has nothing to do with the other. And it's important that parents also allow ownership to be granted to their child in terms of those behaviors. It's going to help reframe how we approach behaviors in general. And it removes some of that guilt that parents have for their child's behaviors or their development, because it is, like I said, it's not their fault, but parents are often embarrassed when behaviors are occurring. That's going to cause them to react defensively. Also, just trying to be that advocate. So saying the child's name, if I say your child is hitting other kids on the playground, now the parent is going to feel like either they're going to feel embarrassed, my child's hitting the other kids, or they're going to react defensively. Oh, my child is doing this. Why? What are you not doing? And then we have this back and forth with the you and yours. But if instead I change it and I say, I've noticed that John is hitting the other kids on the playground when, and I tell them specifically when it's happening. Now the behavior belongs to John, and I can follow up with the phrase that's going to lead to a collaborative statement and a conversation. So it's a small change, but it makes a big difference. As I mentioned before, we're referring to behaviors as expected or unexpected. Behaviors are not good or bad. They are either developmentally expected or not. And it's important to reframe that for two reasons. One, because the behaviors are not good or bad, like I mentioned. We view things negatively when it's unexpected because it's a challenge. It's something that we have to overcome, but it's really not a negative behavior. The other part of that is that it doesn't give parents any usable information if we say things like good or bad. So if I say, oh, Jill's really bad at taking turns, that tells the parent absolutely nothing about Jill's skills in regards to taking turns. All it tells them is that I personally have a negative perception of their child's ability to take turns. Emotionally, I don't like what Jill is doing when she's supposed to be taking turns, but I'm not giving them any usable information. The same thing can be said for positive behaviors. If I say Jill is so smart, okay, parents know that I have a positive perception of their child's cognitive abilities. In what area? We don't know. So being specific and really reframing how we feel about behaviors and how we view skills makes a big difference in how specific we're going to be in our objectivity during the meeting. It's also really important to use person-first language. If you're working with children who have special needs, make sure that you are addressing the child first. We are working with children who have autism. The child, we don't want to say, well, the child is autistic, your child is autistic. We don't want to say that. Jill has autism. Joe has a speech and language delay. Really important to use that person-first language and to avoid making assumptions about delays and disabilities that are not diagnosed, that are not identified. If you want to make a referral because you have concerns that a child might have some additional needs, that's okay. We definitely want to make sure that we identify those needs and we get children screened as soon as possible so that they can start receiving services as soon as possible. That's really important. But making assumptions causes a break in the relationship. If I say, oh, I'm really concerned that Joe might have autism because he's doing these things. Now, in the parent's mind, the parent can't hear what I'm saying anymore. All the parent can hear is, oh my gosh, this teacher thinks that my kid has autism. Let's say the parent is okay with it. They go to the screening, child does not have autism. Now they've gone through this whole cycle of worry and concern. And now child does not have autism. Now that relationship with me is broken because I caused that. That was my responsibility to present that information in a more respectful and responsible way. So it's really important. If you feel a child has a speech and language delay, you want them to be screened, have that conversation, but be specific and avoid making assumptions. You want to talk to families about seeing if their child qualifies for other services to support certain areas, but making assumptions about a delay or a disability is really harmful to that parent-teacher relationship. And that can be hard to overcome once that relationship breaks in that way. We also want to really focus on using words that imply our positive intent. So sometimes when I'm listening to conferences or I'm sitting in on another conference, I might hear somebody say, oh, well, we have to deal with this behavior, or we're handling this behavior this way. Instead of using that, really focus on positive intent, words that convey your positive intent. We are supporting the child. We're teaching the child. We are preventing this behavior from happening, and we are teaching a replacement behavior. So it's really important that your intent is shown through your actions and your words. When you say you're handling or you're dealing with a situation, that implies it implies that it's a burden. It's a burden for this to happen. It's inconvenient. You're unhappy about it. We're dealing with this. We are supporting Sarah in developing these skills. We are teaching Ella how to do this. And it's more positive, and it shows families that you are working towards a solution as opposed to managing a situation that's not ideal. Okay, here, avoid saying you. Now, this is not always necessary, but this can make a big difference. And I chose this picture very intentionally because it seems very aggressive and assertive. And if you are working with a family who is prone to reacting defensively, or a family who is really sensitive about certain topics, it's really important to be extra mindful of how you're approaching the situation. Some people just have more outgoing personalities, and they respond differently. So if you are working with a family who responds defensively, who's easily upset or emotional during conversations, avoiding saying you can make a big difference. When you say you, that can trigger a defensive response, sort of like the your child situation. So you can imply ownership. It can also unintentionally imply blame. And if a parent is prone to reacting defensively and you're saying you periodically throughout the meeting, and not that you did it, but if you're saying you, every time you say that with a parent who is prone to reacting defensively, it escalates it just a little bit. And it doesn't take too much for a parent to get upset when they're already sensitive about talking about their child's development or their skills or their behaviors. So here I just put a really quick example, and instead of saying, what do you do at home when, you can easily replace that with, what happens at home when? Another way to rephrase that to even get a more collaborative response with a family, taking out that you, would be something like, when Kyle has a tantrum at home, what strategies are helpful? So instead of what do you do when, and then the parent says whatever they do, what strategies are helpful? And now this is going to be a collaborative conversation, and you're going to hear not necessarily what they do most often, but what they've done that was effective. Because sometimes, even as professionals, you have something and it's very effective, and just the next time the behavior occurs, you do something else. And so really focusing on what strategies have been helpful can make a world of difference, and then brings that family back around. That's a good strategy just to use in general. You don't have to take you out of your vocabulary. That's gonna make conversations much harder if you're trying not to say you all the time, but that can be effective if you feel the conversation start to turn. So as you're planning for the meeting, it's important to have your desired outcome in the back of your mind. What do you want the parents to do? What is the child needing to do? What is the staff and any other support personnel who you're working with need to do in order to realize your goal? Planning that out in your mind. When you meet with a family, they're going to want to know, well, what can I do at home? Let them know what they can do at home. Let them know what you're expecting from the child, and then you're outlining your plan. So have all of those things ready so that the meeting just goes smoothly. It's also really important to know your audience. If you know that a family is really sensitive or defensive, plan that out a little bit more carefully. If there's a family who's sensitive about certain topics, it's important to be mindful of that too. Many years ago, I had a family and the child had autism, and the family, they just rejected that idea. Totally fine with me. Doesn't make any difference to me whether or not the parents want to acknowledge it. The parents were more than happy to utilize any strategies that I suggested and the team suggested to work collaboratively. We had a great working relationship. If somebody unfamiliar with the family joined the meeting and said autism, it was an immediate shutdown. So if you know that there's something like that happening with the family, there's certain trigger words, don't use those words. Doesn't matter. The most important thing is working towards supporting the child and the family, realizing that goal. And if that means not saying certain things, just don't say it. Pretty easy. Once you realize what's happening, no reason to get stuck because of something that in the long run really doesn't impact the outcome of your goal. Also, it's important to know about families, work schedules, personalities. If a family is really chatty and they tend to dominate the conversation, that's going to be really important to know. Sometimes parents who talk a lot and they want to talk over you, they use that as a defense mechanism so that they don't have to talk about what you want to talk about. And sometimes not, sometimes it's just a personality thing, but it is important to know those things and to realize that, because that's going to help you plan out the meeting and figure out your time. If the family's usually in a hurry, they have a ton of things to do, they have appointments, they have work schedules, know that too, because that's going to help you plan out how you're going to approach the meeting. A family who's really chatty, they're going to want to spend more time with you. A family who's in a hurry, they're going to want to get to the point and move on. And then also just keeping in mind where you are in this process, if you've had multiple meetings, if this is the first meeting, things like that. So as you're scheduling the meeting, it's really important to know how to contact the family, the best way to get a hold of them, and a good time for them. If you know that they work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, don't schedule the meeting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Try for a Thursday or Friday. Try and find a time that works best for everybody, and let them know the duration of the meeting. Maybe they can squeeze it in during a lunch break or right before they go into work. Let them know the amount of time that they're going to need to dedicate and honor that. If you say we're going to meet for 15 minutes, make sure that that meeting goes to 15 minutes. Oh, sorry, moving things all over the place. Here we go. So if you need more time, let them know. That's okay. Even if they are struggling to find a way to meet with you, most conferences or parent meetings, 10 to 15 minutes is plenty of time. If you are discussing a challenging behavior, something that's going to need a little bit more, there's going to need to be a longer conversation, 15 to 20 minutes works. If the family's really chatty and you know that they're going to want to contribute a lot to the conversation, maybe you push for 30 minutes. It's really important that they're honoring your time and that you're honoring their time. And the last thing you want is to be in the middle of the meeting and the parent has to go back into work because their break is over, or they have to leave because they have to pick up one of their children from school or something happens. So make sure that you plan out that amount of time so that you can address what you need to address and allow time for them to contribute what they need to contribute or what they want to contribute. The most important thing is to tell the family what the meeting is about. If it's like parent-teacher conference week, a lot of times you're just going to have 15 to 20 minutes to just talk about a lot of things. But when we're talking about like these types of meetings, these are meetings that you're calling outside of a designated conference time where you're really needing to get the parent in because you need to discuss something really specific. And these are going to be those conversations that tend to be more challenging because you are needing to address a concern. You're not just talking about the child's behavior in general, you're calling a meeting for a specific purpose. Tell the parent what the meeting is about. If you're talking about behavioral concerns, they need to know specifically which behavioral concerns. If you're talking about a developmental concern, let them know that too. That's going to work in a few different ways to, first of all, let the parent know what they're walking into so that they're not caught off guard coming into this meeting. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, you're noticing all of these things. Another way this is going to work is it's going to give parents an opportunity to reflect on what they're seeing at home. Sometimes, especially if families don't have a lot of experience with young children, they might be observing a behavior and think that it's typical. They might think, oh, well, that's just what 4-year-olds do. And it might not be what 4-year-olds do. So letting them know that that's a concern. This is when we're seeing it. I want to come in because I want to develop a plan, or I have a plan and I'm going to need your support. I'd like to have you come in and we can discuss it. That's going to give them a day or two, depending on when the meeting is, to reframe how they're observing their child's behavior, what they're seeing, and when they come to the meeting, they'll have more input for you because now they're thinking about it and they're focusing on that. Also include who's invited. If the parent thinks that they're just coming in to meet with you one-on-one and there's a team of people there, that can also catch a parent off guard. So let them know who's invited. Along those lines, let them know if their child is invited. If there's somebody there who can play with the child during the meeting, let them know. That's always nice if you can offer some sort of childcare during that time. If there's not, that's important too, because if you're trying to have a very serious conversation and there's a young child running all over the place, that's going to be distracting for everybody. So as you're beginning the meeting, I like to invite the parents to go first. I called them, I let them know what the meeting's going to be about. They've had some time to think about it. If they're holding a lot of ideas in their mind and they're worried and they really need to talk about their concerns or what they think are my concerns, I want them to go first because I want to clarify any possible misconceptions they may have regarding my concerns. And I also want to hear what's happening at home. And that's going to help me just sort of fine tune my plan for moving forward. It's also going to allow them to hear me once they've said what they need to say. They're no longer going to hold that in their thought bubble. They're no longer going to be holding on to those thoughts and those questions because they're going to have been answered or they're going to have been addressed. And now they're going to be able to hear what I have to say, and it's going to just let the conversation go pretty smoothly. It also will allow more collaboration. When the parent is going first, 9 times out of 10, they're going to talk about what you wanted to talk about because you've let them know what the meeting is about, and they're going to stay on topic. Every once in a while, a parent's going to come in and they're going to say, you know, I know you really want to talk about this, but I'm more concerned with this. Actively listen to what they say. Take your time to hear what they're saying. Just as we don't want them to be solely focused on their agenda while we're trying to present our information, we don't want to be so focused on our agenda that we can't hear them. We've invited them in and their concerns are equally valid. So if it's something that you can address in that moment, address it in that moment. If that's something that you're going to need to think about and plan and maybe conduct some more observations or get some more information, let them know and schedule a follow-up meeting to address that if you're not able to do it right in the moment. If you can, then please feel free to address that right in the moment. And then finally, as you are opening the conversation, when it's your turn, you're going to lead with an I notice statement. And I'm going to go into that next in the next slides. But before I move on, I do want to point out that I mentioned before, if you know a family is really chatty, the families can use that to sort of take over the conversations at times. If that's the case, you may want to go first. You may want to sort of lead that meeting and then allow them time afterwards to start. So that's also part of knowing your audience. You want to make sure that the conversation doesn't get monopolized right from the beginning if you know that that's a possibility, because it's really hard to interrupt a parent when they're talking about their concerns to say, oh, well, I really need to talk about this, because we don't want to be dismissive of their concerns. So if you know that, go ahead and start first. Okay, with the I notice formula, we're going to really focus on keeping the conversation objective. And this is this is a really effective way I found for addressing concerns in a really specific and objective way that removes that emotion and speculation. So you're really going to need to analyze what's happening before you have these meetings. And this is going to help you specifically identify those observable behaviors or skills, compare it to the developmental expectation, and then include what you've tried and what's been effective and your plan for moving forward. So here I have an example of how to start into this conversation. So an I know statement might sound something like this. I notice that when Sarah arrives at school, she cries for about 10 minutes during drop-off. So here I'm stating specifically the behavior that I'm observing and the amount of time the behavior is lasting. Then I'm going to make my comparison. At 3 years of age, crying for a couple minutes during drop-off is an expected behavior. I think crying for a couple minutes is expected. Crying for 10 minutes, maybe not so much, but I'm not going to drill that in right now. I'm going to just continue moving on. Next, I'm going to tell the family what I've tried and what's been working. We've been giving her some quiet time to play in the classroom before she goes outside on the playground to avoid some overstimulation right at drop-off. And then my final step is to let the family know what I'm expecting to see, the expected behavior, and how I'm planning to reach that goal. I would like to see Sarah have a shorter recovery time of 1 to 2 minutes after being dropped off in the morning. My plan is and there I'll outline my plan based on the family and the child. It's going to be very specific. And then I'll outline their role in that plan and the role the staff is going to play. So that anybody who's working with the child knows what's going to happen, their role, and we all agree to it. If I tell the parents that I'm wanting them to come in a few minutes early to spend a little bit extra time transitioning with Sarah, and they are very busy in the morning and that's not going to work for them, I need to make sure that by the end of the meeting, if I really think that this is the best plan for Sarah, that we find a way to make that work. In some way or another, or we have to come up with a different plan. So it's really important that you outline the expectations for everybody. In some cases, you might need to provide an explanation for why you think that's going to be effective. The family says, in the mornings, we're always in a rush, and I just don't think I can spend 2 minutes getting her settled. I really have to get in, drop her off. It already takes 2 minutes to get her into the school. Whatever they're saying, doesn't matter. You're going to need to problem solve. And possibly if they're in a rush every morning, that's triggering it. So I might say something along those lines. You're going to listen carefully to what the family says, because no matter what the objection is, if you really feel like this is the most effective strategy, they're going to give you some background insight as to how their mornings are going. And then you're going to be able to think about how that's impacting the child and clarify that. And sometimes parents don't realize how one thing or another impacts their child in many different ways. So be prepared to explain why you think your plan is going to be effective, and listen to what the parents are saying so that you can have a little bit more insight. And that's going to help work. It's going to help you work more collaboratively with the family as well. So in general, there's like 2 types of meetings. There's meetings where you're pretty sure you have a good handle on the situation. You're calling the parent in because you've done your data collection, you've observed the child, you have a pretty good handle what's going on, and you're just wanting to fill them in on the behavior so that they know that the behavior is occurring. And then you want to let them know the plan and any role that they need to play in this plan. There are also going to be other meetings where you've been observing the behavior, you can't quite get a handle on when it's happening or why it's happening, and you really need more support from the parent. You don't have a plan because you don't know why it's happening or how to best support the child. So in those cases, that is going to take a slightly different approach, where that meeting is going to be much more collaborative. If you know the cause or the trigger of the behavior, have a really good handle on it, then you're going to be mostly just presenting your plan and getting some parent feedback and some parent buy-in. So we're going to go into that type of plan first, where you are pretty sure you know what's going on with the child and the behavior. So you're going to start by leading with an expected skill. So this is the skill that the child can do that's related to what is unexpected, the behavior that they have or the skill they have that is not developing in the way we would expect for a child that age. So you're going to lead with that expected skill. Then you're going to explain the significance of those skill. So I notice this tells me, and explain what it tells you in terms of that child's level of functioning in that area. Then you're going to state the range of expectations, or before you do that, you're going to identify the unexpected skill. From there, you're going to compare it with the range of expectations based on the child's age. You're going to identify any strategies that you've been using and your plan for the child and the family. So you're going to identify the successful strategies that you've been using and then your plan, state the plan for the family, and then follow up with a reasonable timeline to meet again, or the next steps. Let them know what the next steps are and their role in the plan. So we're going to go into an example. I'll just sort of break this down so that you can see how it might sound, or you can hear how it might sound, and I'll just provide a little bit of an explanation for all of these skills. So when I'm meeting with the family, I'm going to go through this whole thing. It'll be my turn for this whole time. I'm going to go ahead and interrupt myself here just a little bit to clarify what's happening, but this would be my whole presentation. After the parent has gone first, I would go through this sort of a process, and then we would go from there with any follow-up. So to start, we'd start with, I noticed that Joe's able to take turns with preferred toys like large building blocks and puzzles, which is an expected skill for a child his age. This is what he can do. This tells me that he understands turn taking and is willing to take turns when he's not fully invested in playing with certain items. So that is the implication. He knows how to take turns. He is able to do it. The issue is more that he is unwilling. I've noticed that when he's playing with trains, cars, or other preferred toys, Joe will yell and hit kids or adults who enter his space. This is the unexpected behavior. At this stage, we expect children to begin to negotiate turn taking with some adult intervention without hitting or experiencing tantrum-like behaviors. This is the expectation for a child his age. Then I'm going to go into my plan. My plan is to continue using a timer. Let me back up a little bit. Here's what we've been trying. To support Joe during playtime, we've been taking turns with one peer using a timer, and Joe's beginning to respond to that strategy. This has been successful. So my plan is to continue using a timer to work on turn taking in small groups of 1 to 2 children at least twice a day over 2 weeks. I expect that once he feels confident he will get a turn with his preferred toys, the behaviors we're seeing will decrease. This provides a timeline and the expectation. While we are working on supporting development of turn taking and managing strong emotions at school, I would like to refer Joe for a developmental screening to see if there are any services that he may be eligible to receive. And this is the follow-up piece for the parents. So at school, I have a plan for how we're going to decrease the behavior. I'm not thinking that this is going to eliminate the behavior, but I'm thinking it's going to decrease the behavior because I'm thinking that there might be something else happening that's impacting his development and having social emotional control and being able to self-regulate. I am going to recommend that he have a developmental screening. Now the family might agree and we go from there. The family might ask for more information why I think that there might need to be a developmental screening, or they might just want some more information about what that implies. From there, I'm going to have that conversation. If there are other areas of development that we haven't previously discussed that are trigger or that are cause for concern and that I'm using as my reasoning, I'm going to have those prepared with another I notice statement in 1 or 2 more areas. And we'll just sort of go from there. Sometimes these conversations are really quick and the parents say, great, okay, that sounds like a good plan. What can I do at home? You work from there. So this is just your opening, and then the rest of the meeting, you're just working towards realizing that goal. And the goal in this situation is to help Joe manage those strong behaviors and decrease the amount of hitting that's happening. And also for him to start with a developmental screening to see if he qualifies for any services. Sometimes you don't know what's happening. Sometimes you're observing a child and you're not quite sure the trigger of the behavior. That's going to happen sometimes, no matter how well you know the child or the parent. Sometimes that's just going to happen. So in those situations, you're going to have a slightly different approach to the meeting. You're still going to lead with the expected skill, but then you're going to ask about the concern. So you're leading, well, Joe can do this, but I'm noticing when this happens, this is the behavior. Can you tell me about that? Tell me about that behavior. As the parent's talking, then you're going to state the expectation. Well, at this stage of development, we expect children to do this. We've tried these things. Tell me about what's helpful at home. What strategies are successful at home? In some cases, there's going to be a lot of follow-up meetings trying to really identify the trigger for a specific behavior or a strategy that works for supporting a child. So just keep working with the family. You might meet once a month. You might meet every couple months just to keep checking in. It depends on what's being addressed, but this is a very collaborative meeting. So you're not going to have a plan to lay out for the family. You're going to be developing the plan during this meeting. It's really important that as you're developing a plan with a family, that if they are giving you suggestions, that you are utilizing those suggestions and implementing them into your plan, even if it's something you don't typically do. I personally do not use rewards in my teaching practices. I feel like that's an ineffective strategy for long-term growth and behavior and changing behavior. But if I'm asking for help from a parent and the parent says, you know what? Kyle loves stickers. If you give Kyle stickers, Kyle will do anything. If that's their main suggestion, I'm going to utilize it. I'm going to utilize it. I'm going to see how effective it is. And then I'm going to work on phasing that out and replacing that strategy with something else once I've identified the cause of the behavior. So use whatever you can from the family. If they say something that you can't do because it's not allowed, sometimes families will do stuff like that. Way parent at home is not necessarily what's acceptable at school all the time. Find something that they said that can be utilized at school so that they feel that it truly is a collaborative effort. You're really working for the benefit of the child, so take their input. They are the experts when it comes to their child, and acknowledge that and really work collaboratively to support their child. So sometimes we're having meetings and they're more serious. It's not just addressing a specific behavior or skill that's of concern that needs a specific type of intervention put in place. Sometimes it's something more serious when like a child might be at risk for not being able to continue in the program. And that could be because the child has a reoccurring behavior that's not able to be managed by the staff. Or it could be that there's an issue with the parent. The child could be very successful in the program, but there's an issue with the parent that could result in the family needing to leave the program. So in the previous slides, using that I notice formula is going to be really effective for targeting specific behaviors and working from there. When you're having these other types of conversations and there's risk for expulsion or some other type of consequence, you're going to need to change your approach and refocus it a little bit. So when this is happening, it's really important that that you have a good understanding of why this is a problem and outline how to resolve it. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, just in general, is keep everything clear and concise. This is going to be a fairly short conversation, and it's going to be very targeted. Your first step is to explain the situation. Identify the policy that's been violated. In cases where a child or a family might need to be removed from the program, there's almost always an underlying policy that's been repeatedly broken. This could be because a child's behavior is, there have been a lot of these meetings with and a lot of conferences to address specific behaviors. The behaviors aren't being resolved. Something else needs to happen in order for the child to continue. Could be something with the parent. The parent is late with payment consistently. The parent picks up late often. There are other violations in the policy that are going to result in the child being, or the family being removed from the program. When addressing these situations, remove yourself from the situation as much as possible. State the policy and then explain why the policy exists. In a lot of early childhood programs, it's going to be a policy out of your control. It's a licensing policy, it's a district policy, it's a school policy. Let them know, this is a school policy, we have to follow this. This is a licensing policy, it's for this reason, we have to follow this. If it's your center and it's your personal policy, it's not based on licensing or anything like that, that's okay. Still remove yourself from ownership of the situation, because the situation is, this is the policy, this is what's happening, the policy is being violated, and this is why the policy exists. We have to follow this policy. So it's really important just to remove yourself from the situation so that families aren't directing their anger at you or their frustration at you. This is the policy. Your center, your rules, still the policy, and they agreed to that policy when they enrolled. So that's important to acknowledge. So identify the policy, explain what's been violated, why it exists in the first place, and then develop a plan. You might be in a situation where there's a given amount of time that the family has to complete some next steps. If there's a behavioral challenge, you might say, in order for your child to continue, the child does need to have a developmental screening and be assessed for, if there are some red flags. Maybe the child needs some additional services in order to be able to continue. Sometimes that happens. If the parent is late on payment, how long do they have to make up the payment? If the parents are not picking up on time and this is a repeated problem, what needs to happen? How long do they have before they will need to be removed from the program? Be really specific. You're going to be as clear and concise as you can, give a very specific timeline. And as you're speaking with families, you know these families, and some families struggle a lot. It's really important not to fall into any sort of sympathy pitfalls, I might say, because you feel for the family. You definitely feel for the family. We know these children, we know these parents. But if we are overly sympathetic to whatever is causing the situation, we're allowing the situation to continue. We're giving them permission for it to continue. And if it's come to the point where they might need to be removed from the program, we cannot give them permission for this behavior to continue, whether it's the child's behavior or the parent's behavior. So just be very clear, concise, be specific. While you're stating the consequence, it doesn't have to be a negative conversation. You're just clearly outlining, this is what's happening. This is why this policy exists. Here's a plan. We need this to happen by this time. You can say it calmly and in a positive way. The consequence is the same, whether you say it in a friendly way or not. So go ahead and say it in a friendly way. You don't want to break the relationship with the family. Our goal as early childhood professionals is to keep children in these programs, to keep the families in these programs, and they really need to feel that. These are types of meetings where parents are more prone to act defensively. Ooh, my goodness. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what let me back up a little bit. There we go. Sorry about that. These are conversations where families are more prone to be upset. So it's really important that we are being positive and really conveying that sense of wanting to help them stay in the program. In the next type of really hard conversations can be when you're part of an evaluative team and you're presenting assessment results about a diagnosis, or you're part of an IEP team, or part of a team that's changing placement for a child. So all of these things can trigger strong emotions. Keep in mind, these parents are new to this. This is not a 13-year-old who has been in special education for a number of years. This is their first time hearing about their child's special needs. This can be a very overwhelming topic for families. It can be emotionally overwhelming. It can just be mentally exhausting. These meetings can be an hour to an hour and a half. It's a lot for parents to take in. Give them space to have those emotions. And the most important thing that you can do is to be calm and be positive and be there to support the family. In these types of meetings, most of the time, a specialist is going to go first. The specialist is going to present their testing results. They're going to have charts and all sorts of graphs and things like that. They're going to have a lot of information, percentages and things like that, that parents are not necessarily going to be ready to hear or prepared to understand. As the specialist is going through their areas, note areas that might require some additional clarification. Think about some of the jargon that might have been used. And when it's your turn, you're going to go through and clarify the information that was just presented to the family. Contextualize the information, let them know what it means. They just heard all of this stuff about their child's learning and development, their child's behavior, and where it ranks on a bell curve. And what does that mean? A lot of times the specialists aren't going to present that information. As the person who knows the family better, or better usually than the specialist because they don't spend as much time with the family, you're going to know the areas that are going to need to be clarified, and you're going to know what it means for their child in their current program. You also want to explain the implications in terms of placement. If the child needs a different placement, if they're talking about learning differences, what does that mean? What does that look like? Have resources ready for families so that you can help them know those next steps. If they are really not sure where to go from there, make sure that you have some information. You're going to be able to speak with the specialist ahead of time. Give them as few resources as possible to start, because you don't want to overwhelm them with all of this information and then a ton of resources, but give them a couple. Let them know that you're there if they want to talk about other resources that are available in the community, or if they just want to talk about this information a little bit later. Sometimes it's just so overwhelming that they miss a lot of the content when they finally get the paperwork. They might want to meet with you again to go over that, offer that support in that time. One thing that I do recommend is in early childhood, it's easy to see a parent get upset and then want to comfort them and say something that may not be true. Sometimes in meetings, I'll hear people say things like, well, you know, and we don't know, in a few years, she might not need services anymore. And that can be comforting for the parent in the moment, but think about the long-term effects. What if in the future, the child not only continues to need services, but they find another area of need, maybe a more significant area of need that was not able to be identified in early childhood. This happens all the time because in early childhood, the pace of development is so fast, and we're not able to get a full picture of how that impacts children's learning and development long-term. So a child who may initially be diagnosed with a speech and language delay, in the future, it might turn out that there are other needs. They might have a learning disability as well. They might have another type of disability or disorder. And it's really important that we don't give parents that to hold in their mind, and then they go to the next meeting in 3 years where they're getting a reeval, and then they're just shocked to hear that their child has additional needs. So it's really important to just focus on the here and now, what the child can do, how we're supporting the child. Even if there's a lot of areas of need, we really want to be solution oriented, solution focused, and talk about what the child is doing and how we're supporting those next steps. And we're always looking at the next steps as opposed to the long-term outcome of their child's development as a teenager or as an adult. And those questions are going to be in the back of parents' minds sometimes, but it's important to just focus on the here and now, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And the best thing we can do is just to focus on what we can do right now, because that's going to be what impacts the future. So most of the time, You're going to have really positive interactions with families, even if conversations are really difficult. Every once in a while, a parent is going to get upset. They're going to get upset at, could be any type of meeting that you're having. Most important thing is to stay calm and not take it personally. They're not upset with you. They're upset with the situation. They're directing it at you because you're there. You're there. And if you have a positive relationship with the family or trusting relationship with the family, you might feel like a safe person for them to start unloading on. They're not doing it intentionally. They're just overwhelmed. They're going to let those feelings out. And as this is happening, be calm and listen carefully. Most of the time, as people are unloading, they're going to say exactly what's actually bothering them. If we're listening carefully, as people are, when people get emotional and they are either crying or becoming frustrated or visibly angry, they're going to say what's happening and why they're feeling that way. You just have to hear it. And once you hear that, you can redirect that emotion. Take it right from what they said. I hear that you're upset because, and acknowledge that feeling, validate that feeling, offer them support if you can. We want to respond mindfully to their concerns and their feelings. Like I said before, we don't want to make predictions about things that might not happen, and we want to honor their feelings. If it's getting carried away or there needs to be a break, take a break, take a step back, offer them a break to get some water or to just take a few breaths, come back in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, if you need to, or reconvene the meeting. If you're working towards a solution and it's just not happening because the parent is very upset, go ahead and stop the meeting because it's not being resolved there. We always want to maintain those solution-based conversations. If that's not happening, it's better to stop the meeting than to continue and possibly damage the relationship in a way that's going to be harder to repair. If you do have to stop a meeting, before rescheduling the meeting, work towards rebuilding that relationship with the family and ask them if they want anybody else to attend the meeting. If they want a parent advocate to come in as the professional, you may want another professional to attend the meeting too. If the situation is makes you feel that way, that's okay. Let them know, I want to meet again. I'm going to invite my director, or I'm going to invite my principal. I'm going to invite the psychologist, whoever you're going to invite, to come in and sit in on this meeting to help mediate the conversation. Let them know. Invite them to invite somebody. Would you like to invite somebody to this meeting to help support you? Most of the time, once parents take a breath, they're going to be fine. But every once in a while, there are triggers for families that take a long time to overcome. And there are multiple stages that parents go through when they're learning about their child's needs. And if it's a more significant need that's going to be impacting the child long-term, that can be really hard for them to process, and that can take a long time, and that's okay. We have to allow the space for that to happen. Our job as the professional in that moment is not to react to those emotions and to maintain our position as the professional, being calm, being positive, and being solution-oriented. So that is it. I left my email here. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to respond to any questions that you may have. I really appreciate being able to present again this year, and that's it. So thanks so much.
Cassandra, as always, amazing information. And it's information, honestly, that we just need to be reminded of also. But there are many of us that are just starting to take on this journey. And it's just information that you have a wealth of because you do it every single day and you work with these families. And like I tell my students and I tell other people, that relationship is the most vital thing that you can build from day one. And you never want to lose that. So some of the strategies and the tips that you have given are amazing. So thank you so much for being here and for doing that for us.
You're welcome. Happy to do it. Thank you.
Yes, I hope you have a great rest of your school year. And thank you again for joining us today, and see you soon.
Thanks.